All right. Welcome to Sideboard MTG. My name's Eric, and today we're going to be talking about Grixis Energy. Not just any Grixis Energy, new M19 Grixis Energy, pack full of Nicol Bolas. Hope you guys enjoy. We're going to look into the deck right now. If you guys want to play this deck, there's a quick rent link below. If you're already a Mana Traders user, if you're not a user of Mana Traders, there's a link down there as well, along with a coupon code for those of you who want to sign up. You can. Mana Traders is just a great way to test all the new decks, especially at the beginning of a format like now where everything's fluctuating. This deck may change a half a dozen times before we really find out where it wants to be. So why buy all those cards? Flat rate, rent them, move on. Anyway, Nicol Bolas here. This is the centerpiece of this deck, so I'm just going to start here. Alright, so we've got a 1 mana and Grixis colors, so a 4/4 flyer for 4 mana that has flying, and when it enters the battlefield, your opponent is going to discard a card. Instant 2 for 1. Unless they counter it, you are instantly going to get a 2 for 1 out of your Nicol Bolas. And that 2 for 1 is they're going to discard a card, and then at that point, they've got to deal with this thing. You've got a 4/4 flyer on the battlefield. It is going to do some damage. Alright, so they have to answer this. Heaven forbid they let you get to 7 mana, where you now can use Grixis colors and 4 generic to flip him. Just exile him, transform him. Now, because it will have to leave the battlefield, that we're just going to go ahead and rule away that if this was somehow a token, as soon as you paid to exile him, he would leave the battlefield, the token would vanish, and you don't have another side of the card. Don't even worry about any other rules. Okay? So you're not bringing him back with the Scarab God, then flipping him. Not happening, okay? Alright, but what you can do is you can flip him for 7 mana. And then you can use his neg 4 to pull Liliana out of the graveyard. Now Liliana says neg 3, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So then you can pull one of your other creatures out, like say maybe the Scarab God, or another Nicol Bolas. Maybe a Torrential Gear Hulk or something like that. You pull it out of the graveyard, and then what I like is actually to pull out another Nicol Bolas. Once you get another Nicol Bolas out of the graveyard, the next turn you can flip that one, down tick it to pull back like a Chandra and then something else or whatever. Nicol Bolas can pull himself back. You can pull things out of your opponent's graveyard. He is absolutely phenomenal. So let's look at this Planeswalker side. First off, when you pay them the 7 mana, you're going to get 7 loyalty counters on your transformed Nicol Bolas. Now you can +2 to draw 2 cards, so that takes you up to 9. Now if you neg 3, he'll deal 10 damage to target creature or planeswalker. Sorry, not doming somebody in the face with this one. But that neg 4, bringing target creature or planeswalker card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Now that's a graveyard, yours or your opponent's. So, that Teferi you've been wanting to play in Grixis? You might get to every time you come up against the Teferi deck. Alright, next here, the ultimate is exile all but the bottom card of target player's library. Wow, okay, yeah, everything except for that last one there. Yeah, get rid of that. Okay, so that is kind of the main preface behind this deck. Now, we have seen, Grixis Energy decks be really good and just kind of floating around, tier 1.5 for a little while now. There was a point right after Energy got banned where this was the best deck. And I've kind of used some of the things that we learned back then at dealing with some of these, these choice enchantments and things like that. Ixalan's Binding can be really painful for us, even though Ixalan's Binding a Nicol Bolas, we don't necessarily have to cast it. We can always just cast a Liliana, bring it back, and we can kind of get around things that way. But the deck, we've learned some things in the past with playing Grixis Energy, and one of those is if there's a lot of Scrap Heap Scroungers around, a lot of times you'll want to fluctuate your number of Fatal Pushes and your Magma Sprays. I like to fluctuate these in a 3-2 or go the opposite direction here there with a 2 and a 3. Now here I've went with 3 Magma Sprays and 2 Fatal Push, but that's because I'm not really expecting a lot of green-black decks. I'm not expecting a lot of stompy decks. decks. I do expect them to be there, so I'm not going to be caught without my Fatal Pushes in general, but I'm actually expecting more Knights of Grace, which Fatal Push or Vraska's Contempt cannot deal with. So Magma Spray is absolutely phenomenal there. And then in the red matchups or the red-black matchups, we're seeing a lot of Scrap Heap Scrounger. And Magma Spray is really, really good against Scrap Heap Scrounger. Only having to deal with that card one time is absolutely terrific. Plus, you can pair this with some, combat damage or something like that to exile something permanently. Now, one of the things we're slightly weak to because of that lack of Harness Lightning is something, like a Lyra or something a little bit larger. And that's why we have, the Whirler of Virtuosos. I'm running 2 copies of Whirler of Virtuoso here, and that's because I want to be able to have something to protect my Planeswalkers once we start getting them flipped. As far as Planeswalkers go, the only ones we're running are Chandra and Liliana. Now, some people might want to run some Angraths or something like that, but I find that Chandra just giving you that pressure of flipping an early Nicol Bolas or flipping Nicol Bolas and still possibly having some mana left to do something else is absolutely terrific. Chandra is a really good removal spell, and she's a decent card draw engine. So against control decks and things like that, Chandra is going to help you out a lot. And then if she dies, you can actually use Nicol Bolas to bring her back to actually get yet another removable spell, and then you're left with 2 Planeswalkers on the battlefield. So, something to consider there. Not quite as good as Liliana in conjunction with Bolas, but yet she's still very, very good. I like Chandra, Torch of Defiance here. So I highly recommend that, if you guys want to run the Chandras, you can. If you don't have Chandras, I would recommend at least a creature with a really good enter the battlefield trigger, kind of like Ravenous Chupacabra or Gonti or something. You want that creature to be able to at least trade, and you want to be able to get some instant value out of that creature. So, Ravenous Chupacabra and Gonti both fit the bill here. You could use Hostage Taker, and I wouldn't begrudge you for using Hostage Taker, but the card is a little bit susceptible for me. I'm a little on the fence about using Hostage Taker, but I really like using Hostage Taker when I can bring it back with something like Liliana and have all of my mana available because of the priority rule there. But if you didn't have Chandras, you could use one of those creatures. Now, as far as Consigned to Oblivion goes, now this deals with Hazoret very well. If they're swinging with Hazoret, then they have 1 or less cards in hand. You bounce that Hazoret unless they can replay him immediately. You then Oblivion, and Hazoret is gone. Alright, so deals with Hazoret really well, but we also discovered in the past that it's also really, really good at dealing with things like, enchantments that have removed your creatures. Now, in the past, we would always have to cast the Oblivion to be able to get rid of the cast out or get rid of the, Ixalan's Binding or something like that. Now, here we don't actually have to do that if it happens to be on a Nicol Bolas. If your opponent is hellbent already, you bounce a Nicol Bolas, the Nicol Bolas instantly removes the enchantment from their hand, which is really, really cool. It's a nice, sweet little interaction. So, being able to just bounce enchantments is really, really sweet in this deck. Now, as far as the rest of our draw engine goes, you can kind of count Chandra here as a draw engine, but for the most part, it's going to be the Glint Sleeve Siphoner along with Champion of Wits, to continue putting cards in our hand, or at least to give us selection of those cards. Now, as far as the rest of our removal goes, I'm running 2 copies of Essence Scatter, 2 copies of Abrade, 4 copies of Vraska's Contempt, 2 copies of Consigned to Oblivion, 3 Magma Spray, and 2 Fatal Push. Now, we do have 1 Torrential Gearhulk to get that stuff back. As far as Torrential Gearhulk, there's not a lot of like really neat tricks or things like that you can do with the Torrential Gearhulk in this deck. The best one would be, your opponent doesn't have a lot of cards. You don't want to waste the Oblivion. You're making a greedy play, but yet you're going to do it with the Torrential Gearhulk. You can cast Oblivion at the end of your opponent's draw step with Torrential Gearhulk. So you can instant speed this Oblivion if you wanted to do that. It hasn't come up for me, but I could easily see, going, hey, look, we're at the right life totals. I get this Gearhulk down. If I can guarantee that I swing this turn, then at that point you're not looking at Gearhulking into removal or Gearhulking into, the traditional Glimmer or something like that. Just Gear Hulk directly into the Oblivion at the end of your opponent's draw step. Make sure they have no play that entire turn, and get in for your lethal damage. So that line can come up for you. Now, a lot of these decks aren't running a Braid, but lately we're seeing more and more copies of Oketra's Monument. And with those copies of Oketra's Monument, along with God Pharaoh's Gift and the Troll deck, Aetherflux Reservoir floating around, I don't think that I want to be caught completely without a Braid. Plus, it does deal with things like Goblin Chain Whirler. It deals with, the first killing of a Phoenix or something like that, although that's not exactly where you want to be, braiding a Phoenix. But hey, let's face it, we've all been there, right? We've all been there. All right, so we'll move on up the curve here. We've got 2 copies of the Scarab God, and we've got 2 copies of Liliana. That's pretty much it for the deck. It's pretty straightforward. It is the Scarab God deck. You're wanting to kill and disrupt your opponent's hand or game plan as much as possible in the early game, and then start getting down those Nicol Bolases. Following that Nicol Bolas up with a Liliana, or following it up with a Consign to Oblivion. You can consign your own permanents if you need to. So you could technically consign your own Nicol Bolas, put it back in your hand, play it again, make them discard yet another card. There's a ton of interaction. There's a lot of lines to this deck. I find this deck to be extremely fun to play just because of the number of lines that you're having to look for. So I really like the deck, and I hope that you guys will too. Let's take a look at the sideboard and see what options I'm currently running. Now, these are going to change as the meta keeps fluctuating. Personally, I've got an extra copy of Gear Hulk, and I've got an Argyle's Bloodfast over in the sideboard, to bring in against control decks and things like that. Also, in the control matchups, I'll bring in all 3 Duress and my 3 Negates, and those are just to give me to get rid of all of my dead cards that I have main board. Most of the time, you're just dying to get more of that removal out. Against God Pharaoh Gifts deck, Oketra's Monument, things like that, a Braid works double duty there. Against the Oketra's Monument decks, it will kill Oketra's Monument, but it will also kill absolutely any creature in the deck. Even Angel of Invention in that particular deck never gets above a 3 toughness, so a Braid is phenomenal in the matchup. That deck does really, really well at going wide, so you really have to have that answer. You have to have that Oketra's Monument kill on the spot, otherwise you're going to be running into some major problems. Now, in the main board, we have those Magma Sprays. Remember, that card works really well against Dusk Till Dawn as well, because they're not going to be getting their mentors back. They're not going to be getting their other cards back that they've lost in to your Magma Sprays. Now, Chandra's Defeat. Now, if I had more room in this sideboard, I would probably have another copy of this. The card is terrific right now. There's so many red decks floating around that Chandra's Defeat just really needs to be in anything that can cast it. This is a 1-mana answer to Nicol Bolas, and I'm doing a whole deck tech here on a deck that is meant to abuse Nicol Bolas. So Chandra's Defeat, terrific card. I highly recommend that if you've got red in your deck, you're going to need a couple copies of this in your sideboard. I don't think that's going to be changing anytime soon. I don't think Nicol Bolas is going anywhere, guys. This is going to be a contender, so whether it's going to be my 75 or someone else's, either way, I think these Nicol Bolas decks are here to stay. Plus, there's enough people pushing them that they're going to get some traction. Now, I do have Crook of Condemnation in the sideboard here. It's really good against the God Pharaoh's Gift decks, and we're seeing both the blue-black and the blue-white God Pharaoh's Gift decks. It's also really good in the Scarab God mirror. The Scarab God player that has a Crook with the Scarab God wins the Mana War. Because you instantly have a way to, okay, I'm going to go for this creature. All right, you're going to go for it. All right, well, fine, I'll just exile it. And you've got awesome answers like that. You can wear them out against control decks. You can actually hold off Search for Azkantas. in some games. Not holding them off indefinitely. They will start to fill that graveyard, but you can actually keep Search for Mazcontas from flipping for a long time. Now, and that's something you're really going to want to do, because in Grixis you don't have a lot of ways to answer enchantments, and bouncing a Search for Azcanta is going to be actually really difficult, considering it's 2 mana for him to replay, All right, that's the sideboard. That's the deck, guys. I hope you all like it. I hope you enjoyed it. If you do, share it with others. Go rent it. Give it a try. Let me know how it ran for you. What is your version of Bolas? Throw it over on our Reddit. We'll take a look at it. I am interested to hear what all of you guys got to think about my deck versus... well, not versus, but I also would like to hear about how you're planning on using a Bolas. So let me know in the comments below. My name's Eric from Sideboard MTG. I've had a lot of fun. I hope you've had fun. We'll see you next time.